Hello, this is Bible Talk with Chris. And the question that I'm addressing in this video is, what do you do when you can't hear God's voice? In order to address that question, we need to understand what is God's voice. Well, the voice of God is a word that in Hebrew is call Elohim. Now, let's center at the word call, which is Kaf, Vav, Lamed. Those are the letters that make the word call. Now, the voice of God, call, has three meanings. The first meaning is the verbal voice of God. Now, the verbal voice of God would come to us either in written form or in a spoken form. Now, it's in written form, that's where we have the Bible as the voice of God, written down. The original Hebrew people will look at the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and then they add the prophets, the Navim, and the Psalms, the Tanakh. And that, for them, is the voice of God, the written voice of God. But we also have the spoken voice of God. Whenever God is speaking to us, that's his voice of God. There is a second meaning of the voice of God, and that's the sound of God. Now, in order to understand sound of God, let's understand that voice comes from waves that vibrate to make sound, and that becomes the sound of God. Now, to hear the sound of God, you are following the waves. Wherever the waves are going, you are following them, and that becomes the sound of God, the voice of God. Let me give an example. Sometimes you can't see God, but you can follow his behavior, and that becomes the voice of God operating in our lives. The third meaning of the voice of God is thunder. Now, thunder could be either something that's very loud, extraordinary, a bang that comes into our lives. And that bang in our lives could be a crisis. A crisis is like thunder in our lives. That thunder in our lives could be a blessing. For example, when something extraordinary happens, it is a miracle. A miracle is like a thunder into our lives, albeit positive. So you have positive thunder, you have negative thunder. Negative thunder is a crisis, a problem, a suffering, a persecution that happens in our lives. That is also the voice of God. Now you ask the question, how do we now identify the voice of God? For what we have understood, what call, voice of God is, we now can see that things that are happening in our lives would be the voice of God. What we are reading, what we are hearing would be the voice of God. Now, for all the 3 elements of voice, we could say these are happening to us at all times. How do I identify them? Well, God is everywhere, and so his voice is also everywhere in our lives. Now, how do we identify the voice of God? Well, in order for us to identify the voice of God, we need to know the voice of God. And in order for us to know the voice of God, we have to seek him. So follow him so you can know him. So wherever we are following him, we begin to see patterns of God. And whenever we are seeking him, we will find him. The Bible says that seek me, and when you seek me, you'll find me, and if you seek me with all your heart. So in the next video, we'll talk about how we can seek God. But the first thing to identify God is to seek him. Secondly, once we have sought God, we then have to know him. And to know him, we are talking about understanding his character, how he works, how he is, how he operates and how he relates to us. Once you've sought, once you've known him, then you will have an intimate relationship with him. Once you have an intimate relationship with him, you will certainly know the voice of God. Now, once you've known the voice of God, you identify the voice of God. You could now say, there is no way that I cannot hear the voice of God. After all, God is omnipresent, which means he's everywhere. God is ever present. Now, if he's ever present, therefore his voice is also ever present. We only need to identify and to know and to hear his voice, which is everywhere. His voice is verbal or written. His voice is sound, and God causes waves in our lives, and we can see and hear the sound of God in our lives. And his voice is thunder, either as a miracle or as a persecution, as a trouble, or as a crisis in our lives. Can we not hear the voice of God? We cannot not hear the voice of God because it's there. We only need to identify it. I hope I've helped answer that question, and if you want to understand how to seek God, check my other video on how to seek God. Thank you very much.